The medical market has evolved and is facing unprecedented challenges. Increased government regulation, heavy cost pressure, and the public's desire for sustainable solution are forcing companies to drive operational efficiency and re-look at material selection in order to be successful in the global medical device market. My name is Jason Spencer, and I am the Global Strategic Lead for Henkel's Medical Device Assembly business. And
I'm Dr. Alan Kesselring, Chief Science Officer at EKG Labs.
And today we'll be discussing material and assembly method selection for safe, reliable, cost-effective medical device manufacturing. And we're going to open up with a customer example. A global medical device company was experiencing inconsistent pull strings on their tube set assemblies. Recently, they had implemented a material consolidation strategy and eliminated PVC as a material of concern. They switched from PVC to TPE, and they identified that they were no longer able to achieve the pull strengths desired for that assembly. And they identified that the use of solvent as a bonding method was no longer acceptable. As a result, they investigated a number of different assembly options, and during their initial testing, they did identify one that looked to be very promising for bonding TPE to their acrylic connector. So we're going to come back to this story later on in the presentation to give you the conclusion of what happened, but we're going to utilize this as an example to lead our discussion today. So our agenda, we're going to go through some evolving material regulations, look at TPE as an alternative, look at the concept of solvent welding, review an alternate assembly method, and then revisit that case history to give you the final outcome of what happened. So we have global regulatory concerns for additives and polymers is on the rise. This includes the FDA guidance on DEHP plasticizer and PVC, BPA and polycarbonate, and then a number of different color additives in a range of substrates. All of these are common materials that are used in the assembly of medical devices. And so the outcome is there's a number of material suppliers that are innovating into this space and coming out with new materials for use in medical device assembly. So what is DEHP? It's a plasticizer that's used in PVC to make it more flexible. It can leach, though, from the PVC and be infused into the IV fluid, into medication, or ultimately the blood, and enter the patient's bloodstream. And so the implications of this, or the concerns listed behind me, are endocrine disruptions and damage to the liver, to the kidney, and to the reproductive system. So some very concerning things for our patients. So now I'm going to have Alan give a little bit more feedback as it relates to this topic.
An area where EKG Labs evaluates materials is in how they leach out of plastics and polymers in general. A little background on PVC. PVC is a fairly rigid polymer. It's utilized for plumbing applications, for water pipes and sewage pipes. Some outdoor chairs and things that you might find on your outdoor patio are made of PVC, or it's a very rigid polymer. So in order to make it more flexible, DEHP, diethyl hexyl phthalate, is added in very large quantities, upwards of 20 to 50% by weight, to the PVC to make it a useful polymer for flexible applications. But unfortunately, it also desorbs from the polymer into other matrices it comes in contact with. I kind of illustrate this by a concept of, at a kitchen sink, you might have a sponge, and while that sponge is wet, it has flexibility. You set it on the ledge for a couple days, it will dry out and get hard. Similarly, PVC is a hard material, but with the diethyl hexyl phthalate, it gets soft. But if you take that wet sponge and place it on another substrate, it will wet the substrate. Material comes out of the sponge just like the diethyl hexyl phthalate will come out of the PVC. And as Jason noted, both the FDA's CDHR as well as CDER centers, so for both drugs and medical devices, there is draft guidance suggesting that manufacturers should consider the feasibility of replacing PVC containing DEHP with alternate materials or plasticizers to minimize a patient's exposures to DEHP. So some of the options are, if we're sticking with a PVC as a general base polymer, to include either TOTM, ATBC, or DOTP as plasticizers that wet that PVC. Now, unfortunately, the TOE, any plasticizer that's added to PVC is going to potentially leach out. And so while these three that are listed, as well as others, have significantly less toxicological concern, they are not free of toxicological concerns. So some applications are moving away from PVC completely and moving to more of a naturally flexible polymer, silicone, polyethylenes, and some polyurethanes.
So what different devices are we talking about? The medical devices that the FDA and other regulatory organizations are concerned with are IV and tubing catheters, and you'll see a number listed here, IV administration, dialysis, oxygenation, and so forth, but also bags and tubing, so IV solutions, nutrition and feeding, blood hemodialysis, and respiratory. So these are the different device sets and where this type of change is ongoing and there's opportunities for innovation. So TPE as an alternative. So what is TPE? A thermoplastic elastomer. So it's a copolymer, sometimes referred to as a thermoplastic rubber. It's a class of copolymer that is both a plastic and a rubber, and it consists of materials that are both elastic and also thermoplastic. So it's a very robust material. TPE requires no compounding and no need for reinforcing agents or stabilizers. So very robust in its composition. It's highly consistent both in the raw material and in the fabricated article phase. And it's a resilient material, which is what the properties that manufacturers like the most. So it has the ability to stretch and then go back to its original shape after the stress is no longer there. So as a DEH-free, plasticizer-free, TPE is a strong alternative to PVC, and it's currently used in catheter manufacturing. So what are the implications of changing to TPE? Okay, so now we have this alternate material. So what's the downside, or what are some of the challenges that come with that? So medical device manufacturers looking to use TPE aren't just bonding it to itself. Oftentimes they have to bond to other substrates, and that's where the rub comes in. These different substrates have different polarity, and that can cause issues. So for TPE to TPE assemblies, the high degree of non-polarity requires them to use a non-polar solvent or some other method of assembling those components. However, to join TPE to polar substrates such as polycarbonate and ABS, solvent welding no longer works. So solvent welding is traditionally used for tube set assemblies, but when you have a non-polar going to a polar substrate, there is no solvent out there that will work with both those. So that's where the challenge comes in. Alan will now discuss chemical solvent welding.
A little bit of information about solvent welds. Plastics, depending on the plastic, will have certain degree of solubility in different solvents. A solvent weld works by taking two different substrates, putting a solvent between them that partially dissolves each surface. So it partially dissolves the surface of substrate A and partially dissolves the substrate of surface B, but as the substrates partially dissolve on their surfaces, the interface is allowed to mix, and then the solvent is evaporated, leaving a substrate A, an interface that has both solvent, substrate A and B, and then substrate B. The positives of this is it's a simple way to chemically bond similar surfaces, particularly soft, flexible materials. And so a solvent can be added to the surface, kind of welded together, and then evaporated. Some of the challenges associated with this is that chemically dissimilar surfaces, as Jason just mentioned, generally do not solvent weld satisfactorily because either the solvent isn't able to dissolve both materials in a similar fashion, or the surfaces energetically prefer to remain associated with their base polymer surface. Alternatives to solvent welding. As Jason mentioned, adhesives work very well for solvent welds in that they place a sticky or a hardening material between two surfaces to create a connective bond. While there's no single universal solution for all surfaces, there's a wide range of adhesives and substrate pretreatments that are available to assist in the connection of difficult-to-bond materials, such as Jason has mentioned. An interesting and important thing to note associated with any material selection, including the selection of adhesive, is that while adhesives have been specifically stated in the support of safety initiatives, it's important to evaluate and choose adhesives which are chemically biocompatible with their intended use. Appropriately understanding and applying application of ISO 10993 biocompatibility information, both from your supplier as well as an end use in your medical device, is critical to the successful development of a new medical device and in manufacturing.
So we're going to revisit the case history we talked about earlier. And so if you remember from several minutes ago, we had an OEM manufacturer that was having difficulty getting consistent pull strengths on their tube set assembly. They had recently done a material change strategy and eliminated PVC as a material of concern. And they switched from PVC to TPE grade, and they were struggling with assembling the TPE to an acrylic connector. And because of that, that change would not allow for consistent bond strength. And so they had to look for alternative methods. And they did a number of different options for changing that assembly. And I mentioned they did identify a potential solution for that assembly. And what happened is they found an adhesive that bonded the same with and without pretreatment. And that's a key point because oftentimes materials require a pretreatment to get this bond strength that was required. They identified an adhesive that would allow them to bond with or without pretreatment well above the minimum requirement. And so they then did a much larger DOE to confirm those results. And again, they found that they had this adhesive with or without pretreatment satisfy the requirements. So the outcome is they are moving forward with the redesign, with the adhesive solution, and eliminating the use of solvents. The one caveat is, even though the adhesive demonstrated superior strength without the need for treatment, they are still undecided whether or not they're going to eliminate the pretreatment as part of that process. What did we talk about today? As medical device market continues to evolve and adapt, there are a lot of opportunities for innovation, both from an assembly method standpoint, but also in substrates. When there are new substrates or new materials, this is where we need to really understand the chemical composition and the chemical safety of those solutions. In addition, we need to make sure that we have reliable assembly techniques. So during today's presentation, we used a case history to highlight the FDA guidance on new, safer materials. We detailed some of the implications of making those changes and reviewed liquid adhesives as an alternative assembly option. Moving forward, we would suggest that manufacturers stay informed of the new FDA guidance. They understand the chemical composition and safety of the new materials that they're going to be working with. And we also highlight that there are many studies out there on some of these new materials where material suppliers, adhesive suppliers, and other assembly method manufacturers have worked together to sort of pre-evaluate the assembly techniques. So there is information out there and available for using new materials with data that backs up which adhesive solutions or assembly method solutions provide satisfactory results. So please leverage those. Several adhesive companies offer both fluid delivery as well as curing and can work closely with your design department to not only do the adhesive selection, but also the equipment selection so that you have a robust assembly process. With that, are there questions that anyone would like to have answered? No? We'd love that. Oh, go ahead.
No, that's my cue to walk around with a microphone to make sure that
sure.
that questions are answered. Do you have anything for either of these gentlemen? I have one.
Sure, go ahead.
Can you tell me what is the most unusual application that a medical device manufacturer approached you and said, I don't know if this is even possible that you were able to accommodate? I know I'm putting you on the spot there.
Well, I don't think I have a very specific one, but I will say this. Oftentimes we're challenged with very stringent requirements. And so that requires us to get very close to the customer. We tend to involve like to like. So if we have design engineering, we connect them with our application engineers. We also have our chemists work with our chemists. So we really try to deep dive on what the overall application needs are and the key requirements. And then if our standard solution won't satisfy that, we'll invest the R&D to develop one that will, assuming the business case is involved. So one that comes to mind would be very specific requirements for imaging equipment that had not only a tough requirement for speed of cure, but also had very stringent requirements as it relates to thermal management. So it doesn't get super specific, but gives enough to give you an idea that some of these are very challenging and we work very closely with the customers to satisfy it.
Thank you. And Alan, are you seeing any trends that might be helpful for our guests to think about as they evolve their products?
Yeah, we are seeing some trends. As noted, there are multiple different plasticizer options out there. The specific one to choose in your application has a lot to do with its end-use design. Is this an IV tubing? Is it a enteral feeding devices or things like that. The one thing that I will specifically state is either within your organization or through a trusted resource, develop a relationship with someone who understands the chemical nature of your materials. It will help you significantly moving forward. It can be someone within our organization, another organization, but understand the chemical nature of the materials that you're utilizing.
Thank you. And a question.
Hello, my name is Ilko from 8 Medical. I have a question about DEHP-free tubing. Medtronic is making a tubing for us, and the normal tubing, and we asked them the question, please, can you deliver us the tubing, the DEHP-free? They say, yeah, we can, but for double the price. When I asked the same question with our supplier in Europe, they say, yeah, no problem, it's a few cents more. What is happening here? I think it's not a good strategic decision from Medtronic. Is it rare, or what is the explanation for that?
So the specific question was associated with the price of DEHP-free tubing in the U.S. versus Europe, and why it would be double the price in the U.S. versus just a little bit more in Europe. I can't say exactly that I've seen that in all situations, but in general, manufacturers kind of take advantage of, I'll say, changing regulations and desire to, when there's external forces on the industry, they generally take advantage of it. Functionally, depending on what the technology is of the DEHP-free tubing, they're not meeting it with additional costs of manufacturing.
Jason?
I just want to make a so we have global relationships with a number of substrate suppliers, tubing manufacturers. So happy to look for opportunities that might help satisfy that, because we work with a number of global organizations that hopefully that issue can be resolved. So.
Remind us, what's that booth number?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to come visit us, I'm at 514. Do you have...
I'll be in the general area of their booth as well for the next hour.
Love to connect with you on LinkedIn. Here's my email. There's some videos that we have up on YouTube. And Alan also has information up here as well. So thank you for your time today.